Air New Zealand hasn't ruled out the possibility of extending a 3-week freeze on bookings for passengers wanting to come home to New Zealand so the government can cope with increasing demand on isolation facilities. There's a capacity for 6,849 people in 26 managed isolation and quarantine facilities across 5 cities. But pressure is going on those resources, and Minister Megan Woods says the system can't purely be demand-driven. Emirates and Singapore Airlines are also being asked to stop taking bookings over the same time period. After the hiatus, the government wants Air New Zealand to match its daily arrivals according to beds available in isolation. The national carrier says it will need to contact some passengers travelling in the next 3 weeks to move their bookings because of isolation capacity constraints. I asked Air New Zealand CEO Greg Foran why he agreed to the 3-week booking freeze.
It's pretty simple, Lisa. I was asked to do that to help the New Zealand government, who's a pretty important partner of ours across all aspects, as they're dealing with managed isolation. And as I think about that request and I think about what's right for New Zealand, I think it's a pretty simple decision for us to get in there and provide the right support.
So was the only obligation on you an ethical one in your view? There was no legal obligation? There was no way they could compel you?
Totally ethical, Lisa. I generally go back to principles, and doing what's right is a pretty important one as far as I'm concerned. And we've all seen some of the challenges, that Minister Woods is dealing with here. 7,000 odd people in managed isolation. The numbers are pretty significant, and I think we've got a role to play here, as have all the other airlines, to help us manage the situation just for a short period of time, and then we'll work out a solution from there.
You say just for a short period of time. How convinced are you it's only going to be 3 weeks? Did they ask for 3 weeks from you, or did they ask for a bit more?
No, we had a good discussion over the weekend, and we were talking between 2 and 3 weeks. So to give ourselves a bit of breathing room, we said 3, but that's a number that we'll look at over a period of time. And we may have to look at other solutions around that, because there's a lot of New Zealanders who live overseas who are obviously looking at coming home, and managing that through, if you like, the entire supply chain is important here. But, that's how we ended up at 3.
So it could be longer than 3 weeks. The door is open.
Possibly. It's something we're reviewing. We know that next week loads are okay. We may need to have a chat with some passengers the week after and see whether some might be prepared to change some days of travel. But, it will be sort of looked at day by day across all the teams, and we'll come up with the right answer.
So how many passengers do you think you might have to offload?
Look, I don't have that number directly in front of me. I can tell you that, we're probably going to see about 5,000 people travel over the next 3 weeks. And in the days that, as best we can tell, that we may be running a bit over capacity, we're not talking hundreds, we're just talking a few here and there. And of course, some of this gets influenced by folk who have booked but then don't actually turn up to travel on that day. So, it's a reasonably complex situation we're dealing with here, and numbers do move around a bit, but we're not talking lots and lots of people.
So Emirates and Singapore are also carrying passengers into New Zealand, and as far as we can tell, they've yet to agree to this at the moment. How could that disadvantage you if they don't agree to do exactly what you're doing?
Well, I'm confident they will agree, Lisa, and the conversations I've been having with the folk down in Wellington is that people are going to get in here and do what's right. And I'm confident that they will, and we'll all end up in the right position here. And
if they don't do the right thing, that's a disadvantage, isn't it? Because your customers can just get on one of their flights.
Well, as I said, I'm confident they will do the right thing.
How much revenue are you foregoing by agreeing to this?
Well, the question is, are you foregoing some of the revenue, or are you just putting it back to a later date? And the answer is probably the latter rather than the former. I think these people will still travel. It's just that instead of doing it in the next 3 weeks, they might do it in the 4th week or the 6th week or whatever. Regardless, we will keep an eye on that and make sure that we end up on the right side of the ledger for all parties concerned.
So, given the numbers that you've seen, are you absolutely sure that this is necessary?
I'm absolutely sure, based on the discussions that I've been having over the last week, this is absolutely necessary.
So after the freeze, the Minister says she's going to talk to you about managing numbers of incoming passengers to align, as she puts it, with isolation availability. So how will that work? Will you have a number of passengers you're allowed to bring in every day? Will you have limits that are placed on you?
Some of those discussions are ongoing at the moment, and we've been party to those, Lisa, and, at a high level, that fundamentally is likely to be the case.
So capacity limits are likely to be the case?
Possibly.
And
yes.
What kind of numbers are they talking about here?
Look, that's a question that you would want to have with the Minister in terms of what she's aiming for in terms of managed isolation.
But what are they telling you in terms of limitations that they may be putting on passenger numbers?
Well, I know at the moment they're working to a number around 7,000, Lisa, and they'll have to decide whether they want to stay at that number or move it.
And what do you think? Should they? Because it is a handbrake on your business if they don't.
Well, it's really a discussion for them. They've got the responsibility of managing the border. Our job is to move people around, and they've got a responsibility to Greater New Zealand around this, and we'll work with them.
So are you saying that, you don't have an opinion on it, when in effect it could, really limit the amount of business that you can do? And I'm sure at the moment, with the way things are, every bit of revenue counts for Air New Zealand, doesn't it?
Well, revenue is important, Lisa, but as I said, a lot of these people are likely to still travel. It's just they mightn't travel next week or the week after. They might do it in a couple of weeks' time. But certainly for the next interim period, we're limiting, or in fact doing no sales for the next 3 weeks.
So all the talk of this Trans-Tasman bubble, are you convinced it's going to happen before the end of the year? Are you planning on it happening?
Our forecasts do indicate that we would be back flying. However, a forecast is a forecast. I certainly had a different view of the Tasman 5 weeks ago to what I've got today, but I do think and would really be hopeful that we were up and running before the end of the year.
And by that you mean with travel that doesn't require a quarantine back and forward to Australia?
Wouldn't that be terrific?
What makes you so confident it might happen?
I know there's lots of people in this country that would love to go there, and there's even more Australians that would like to come here.
What gives you confidence that it will happen before the end of the year?
Well, I think we've got two governments and two nations that are close in terms of their thinking and how they want to operate. And I think there's a lot of benefits for everyone concerned if we can get that bubble up and operating.
Would you be happy to go to the islands first?
I'm actually ambivalent as to where we go. I'd like to do both, to be honest with you, and I think once we do one, we can work out how to do the other one quite quickly.
Hey, I see you were working on a flight recently. What were you doing?
Well, generally I try and get out at least once or twice a week and get around the country and meet the crew and get around the airports and see what's happening. So usually when I'm on a flight, I'll take the opportunity to get up and help the flight attendants.
So what job specifically were you doing on board?
Well, generally I'm up there serving tea or coffee or water and a cookie or the corn chips, and whether we're on a jet or an ATR. And I enjoy getting out and about and talking to our staff and talking to our customers. And I'd have to tell you that I'm really impressed with the job that our staff do. It's a tough gig at the moment in Air New Zealand, particularly as we're dealing with COVID-19 and a number of our crew still travelling overseas and, having to deal with COVID testing and all the other things. So anything I can do to support them is really important.
So you're behind the snack cart then, eh? What's your pitch when you come up to the passengers? What do you say?
Good afternoon, madam. Would you like coffee, tea or water? And would you like a snack? So I've got that down pat. And so far, I've been fortunate, not too many bumpy flights, and I've been able to keep everything where it should be, and haven't spilt anything on anyone.
And the snack options, what are they?
Well, a cookie or the corn chips, and then of course towards the end of the flight, I sometimes get to do the lolly run.
Wow, that's a privilege.
It is. I did have to give it up on the flight yesterday to Christchurch. There was a young boy on the plane who superseded me and frankly did a better job and clearly has done it before.
And that was Air New Zealand CEO Greg Foran. Now, Megan Woods' office has confirmed that New Zealand officials are already speaking to Emirates and Singapore Airlines about freezing bookings to New Zealand. And the Minister's office also says there's been no commercial agreement or inducement for Air New Zealand to put that freeze on for 3 weeks.